I mean, just to your Jack's question about demand, I'm not an economist, so I don't know, but it seems to me that, I mean, obviously there's been a real estate speculation bubble, and it may have partially burst, but this is something that you can see several cycles of it already over the last 10, 20 years, and it seems to pick up again afterwards. There's so much money already invested in these developments that it seems it's, I think, raising them is completely off the table. I mean, not just the developers, but people have put in, have bought, you know, for houses that have yet to be built. So I don't think there's any interest even on the government side in seeing all these projects stall. In fact, I mean, I read something recently that said that some of these real estate companies, as they're being traded on the stock market, are slowly coming back up in value. And also that there's a government committee now formed to arbitrate these, you know, land deals, and I think they are going to try to find solutions that do not involve stalling the projects. And you know, this goes back to, there's been a very stubborn fantasy on the part of government planners for the last 50 years at least about this expansion outwards, which comes down to almost this sort of denial about the existing city, which we see in the informal neighborhoods. There's been a denial about their very existence. First, they weren't on the map forever, and then, you know, about how many people live there and what they consist of and what services to give them. And there's just this idea of starting over, starting from scratch outside the city, which that is what really, you know, government officials and planners need to get abandoned, is this fantasy that you know. And I think, again, what seems unrealistic, you're talking about the number of malls. There's also always in these government projections, you know, the number of office parks and jobs. I mean, it's been abysmal. The record for job creation has been abysmal. And one of the worst effects of these cities is going to be the traffic effect, because they're all built for the automobile. And as the jobs were made in central Cairo, the effect on central Cairo of this increased flow. And you know, someone in the audience mentioned that it's true that I think some of the original housing in the desert was for earthquake victims. And some of the developments have made commitments, although it's unclear to me how much these have been followed up on, to include some you know, lower income housing in their plans, and some of them are not high end, as you pointed out. And I think I agree with you completely that the aspirations and the dissatisfaction of people who are moving to these cities need to be taken seriously if we're going to have a conversation about the future of Cairo. But I don't think that there's a lot of mixity, and I don't see how there can be a lot of mixity in these communities for a long time, because, you know, as my fellow panelists have pointed out, lower income people have their own market supply of housing in other kinds of neighborhoods that works a lot better for them, mostly because it's really dense. So they're looking for very dense neighborhoods that provide job opportunities in the neighborhood, that are going to be serviced by microbuses, because there's a lot of people going and coming from there all the time. And you know, for those people, it is not efficient to live out in the middle of nowhere. They'll be commuting out there to work as maids and construction workers and things, but it's going to be a long time, if ever, before those neighborhoods become mixed.
Yes, of course, there are successful examples in new cities, and I'm sure those living in new cities are very happy to live there, away from the crowds and away from the pollution, etc. But there is the question of sustainability, because now that there are the calls, let's go out of Cairo, let's build new cities. So there is these initiatives and calls, let's go out, let's go out. But how are you going to provide the infrastructure, the water, electricity? Where are you going to get all of this from? And again, commuting. You know, the argument for new cities 30 years ago, where we want to, you know, have sustainable cities, self-sufficient. They don't depend on the center of Cairo, etc. But what we're seeing now, that half of them have not been occupied, and people have to commute every day. I mean, I'm working at the British University and living in Mohamed, and it takes me 3 hours to go home every day, and it's very exhausting. So it's not only about statistics. We need scientific research that informs our decisions, because so far all the decisions are just sitting together, people sitting together. So what do we do next? Let's do this. There are no informed decisions, and this is our opportunity to support and boost scientific research, because this is what's going to help us build the future of Egypt. And if we can't do this, I don't think we will ever get anywhere.
Just on that point about infrastructure and resources, I think, and it comes into something somebody in the audience was talking about, a neoliberal economic framework, not just involving the satellite cities, but in downtown as well, and we see it all around us. This is also about, I believe, a resource appropriation from what should be public resources and what should be owned in the commons to an elite class. And under the Mubarak regime, it was very obvious who that elite class was. It was both domestic and international, and unfortunately in the last 12 months we haven't really seen any sustained challenge to the way that class is constituted. Just as an example, as you know, we were talking about the way in which this was a kind of neoliberal private project, but very much funded and pushed by the state. Building these 8 desert towns, the government has also built water treatment plants. In fact, they've built several, and they built so many that a quarter of Greater Cairo's total water treatment plant capacity now goes towards these 8 desert towns, which make up about, if I'm correct, 2% of the population of Greater Cairo. And that's before you even get into the appropriation of land that was involved in the original sales to build these things. And I completely take May's point about the fact that, perhaps on the panel, our own ideological leanings push us towards kind of slating these communities, and it is good to hear the other side, but I don't think it's just about saying that there are different configurations of urban space. This is one option, Ashra'iyah another option, traditional downtown Cairo is a third, and they've all got their pros and cons. I think when it comes to the desert towns, there is something a lot deeper going on, and I think if I can be a bit prosaic for a second, it comes down to a measure of agency. It comes down to the extent to which Egyptians and the people who live in this country have some kind of creative say over their future, over their society, and over the space they live in. And I think what we've seen with the Satellite Cities project and with the sell-off of Egyptian industries to the private sector, often at below market rates, often in ways which really sucked all kinds of resources from the Egyptian public purse and put them into the hands of private investors, is it's been a robbery. It's been a daylight robbery. And when it comes down to the satellite cities and the I'm trying to phrase this in a way that doesn't sound completely ridiculous, but essentially when it comes to the neoliberal kind of aspect of all of this, as Mohamed said, you have urban planning is about the public, and it's not just private development, it's about how you plan cities for the future. And I think the most toxic legacy of the Mubarak regime was Egyptians being told in so many different ways, political, economic and social, that they had no right to articulate a voice over that. And that came down to political participation and representation, it came down to economic decisions about the resources of the country, it came down to cultural issues. And with the satellite cities, that's part of a much wider process, which again, Mohamed has written about in his blog and other panelists have mentioned. It's not just these desert towns. The Mugama is slated to be moved out of the centre. The Egyptian Museum is being replaced by a $500 million complex in the desert plateau in Giza. The Borsa is being moved out of central Cairo. Several ministries are slated to be moving out of central Cairo. There is a sense of disenfranchising Egyptians from their own organs of government, their own cultural heritage, and now with the satellite cities, their own deserts and their own sense of urban space. And that's why I think that the satellite cities and the desert towns, although I'm sure there are some lovely corners in them with, you know, beautiful fountains and boulevards to walk down, and I understand that for many they represent kind of cultural aspirations, I still think there's something inherently toxic at the heart of them. I don't know what the solution is, and I recognise that there does need to be growth beyond Cairo's traditional borders, just as there has been, you know, for the past 14 centuries to a certain extent. I just think that the way that they've been conceived of here is highly destructive to many aspects of Egyptian politics and Egyptian society. Anyway, let's have some more questions and comments and points from the audience.
Could someone on the panel elaborate on the distribution of water resources? I mean, we've touched on that, and really how this is an unsustainable project, but I'd just be very interested to know how much water these developments take, and in contrast to how much water is used in the Ashwayat.
Right.
Also, within the ones that the state argue that Egypt provides the oil. You see also the north coast, the developments there. And some of these developments, at least some of them, live for them in the whole year. On the north coast, all these houses are used once a year and so on. And interesting now, we see in the land of Taba, which was slated, was a struggle between the local people wanting to sustainably develop it and building a nuclear thing, or building like a touristic, so it's just a struggle. And also, if you go to the Sinai, you've been to the Megawra and so on, you're driving across all these massive resorts put out before. I mean, the question to the panel is what's done is done, but is the move way forward like a unified building code that could be applied in Cairo and outside of Cairo?
Maybe one should play devil's advocate in a different way. I mean, maybe the solution to all of this is actually to some, proper neoliberalism, and let those people pay for their water, proper prices. Let those people pay for their infrastructure, proper prices, and let the city centre say everybody who comes in with a car actually has to pay a fee to come into the city centre with a car because you're messing with our air and our streets, etc. And then maybe you get a solution and people will either move back, or if they have the money, they will support the city centre in an indirect way.